Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope all is well. Okay, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about George Orwell's great book, 1984. One of the most powerful warnings ever made against the dangers of totalitarian society. And just quickly, if you don't know, the story centers around the protagonist, Winston, who has to contend with oppression in a place called Oceania, a place the ruling party with a capital P, observes and controls human actions with ever-watchful Big Brother. Okay, so what I want to try to talk about is a couple of important themes in the book. The first of which is the issue of the consequences of manipulating language. Okay, so let's back up a bit and start with this. So what Orwell was clearly sensitive to, what he knew well, was just how important language was to thinking, to human thought. Actually, not long after the publication of 1984, he wrote an essay on the connection between political orthodoxies and the slandering of language. Anyway, what he understood was how essential language was to human thought, in the sense that language not only shapes, but it also restricts the concepts and the beliefs that we're able to come up with and articulate. Okay, so how does this play out in 1984 then? Well, so what Newspeak does, which is the official party language, what it does in its assault on and its reorganizing of English is it basically makes it near impossible for anyone to entertain critical or defiant thoughts, and therefore to rebel. And of course, that's because there's no longer the right language available for people to access with which to think such critical thoughts. In other words, the language of Newspeak, which is meant to supplant English, what it has is the fundamental aim of reformulating words and how it is they're used in such a way that people will no longer have the ability of conceiving of anything that might cast doubt upon the supremacy of the party. Or as one commentator put it, the program of Newspeak is to define words until an ideal, pure party language confines human thought within the confines of its own linguistic prison. Now, the effect of this, of course, is that all of reality becomes absorbed into the party's semantic vocabulary. Well, so here's the thing then. Because of this, there's no longer any recourse to old words. And so no longer any recourse to the past and to the language which preserved it. No, there's no world other than the present one. And therefore, tragically, no intimation anymore that things were or could be different than they are. And to repeat, Orwell's basic point here is just that when you narrow the semantic space of language, what you do is you narrow human thinking. But this means that when you attack language, when you diminish it, corrupt it, or pervert it, you're in a very real sense attacking our fundamental human nature then. You're degrading our very being. So the debasement of language runs the risk of not only making us more susceptible to binary either or thinking, and so engendering in us totalitarian proclivities, but also to turning us more and more into one-dimensional beings. Actually, you know what? It seems to me that Orwell has a lot in common with the French philosopher Albert Camus, especially in regard to their view on language. I mean, Camus thought that one of the reasons for all of the war and the ideological divide of the 20th century had to do with, well, with lack of clear dialogue. Lack of clear dialogue between people. Rhetoric, bloated language, and falsehoods are scourges, he says. They shatter communication and they prevent any real kind of discourse. What he hoped for in post-war society was what he called the civilization of dialogue. Now, that's what we needed most. And that we still do is painfully obvious. But more specifically, why the misuse of language bothered Camus so much is because he believed it inevitably led to, well, to catastrophe at every turn. For him, to play loose with words was never an inconsequential thing. Every ambiguity and every misunderstanding and every deceitful use of language, he says in The Rebel, leads ultimately to death. I mean, for example, isn't justice often just a kind of euphemism for murder, and so therefore a kind of license to it? Actually, now that I think about it, Ernest Hemingway had a very similar criticism here. I mean, I think in Farewell to Arms, he makes the Henry character say that abstract words such as glory and honor were just obscene beside the concrete names of villages and the number of regiments. Now his point is pretty clear, right? We have to dismiss such artificial, abstract concepts, for they only serve to perpetuate war while at the same time concealing its consequences. That is, those very specific realities on the ground, the dead and the bloody bodies that populate it. Actually, Simone Weil, the French mystic and philosopher, said something very similar too. She said that we use political words like nation or capitalism or communism and go on to give them a kind of authority that in reality they don't really have. And that's because in reality things just aren't fixed or isolated abstractions. No, they're always qualified in some way and subject to changing, varying realities and conditions. But again, what we do is we forget this, Weil says. So what happens is that these abstractions, they stupefy our mind, and they not only make us willing to die, but worse than that, they make us forget the very value of life. Anyway, so back to Camus for a second. So as Camus makes his character Tarou say in The Plague, all our troubles spring from our failure to use plain, clean-cut language. So for Camus, it turns out that if we want salvation from death, we need to start using clear and transparent language and simple words. We have to resolve to try to always speak clearly. Actually, for Camus, not only is it bad to play loose with language in the way that I've been describing, but it's even worse when you start hearing only one voice out there. You know, when all other voices are drowned out by it. And that's because monologue always precedes death. In other words, if somebody is spewing out rhetoric from a pulpit, or from a mountaintop, or from a podium at the croup factory, overwhelming all other voices, and where there is no dialogue left at all, then we know we're in for a very serious problem. Okay, so I want to mention one last theme in 1984, not unconnected to what I've been saying already, actually. And that theme has to do with the abuse of history. Okay, so essentially what happens in 1984 is that the party basically controls everything in Oceania, including history itself. Now, what I mean by that is that not only does the party redraft history for its own ends, but it also doesn't allow individuals to keep any kind of evidence of their own past, such as, important papers or photographs or things like that. So, of course, what happens because of this is that people's memories become more and more vague and unreliable, which means that they become perfectly disposed to believe whatever the party tells them about their own past and about history in general. In other words, by wearing down people's memories and then pumping their minds full of propaganda and false information, the party's able to exchange people's memories of history with its own version of truth. And of course, what their own version of truth is that the past was a terrible place to be until, of course, they came around to make things all better. Okay, so what Orwell is partly warning us about here is the importance of the past, about the importance of history. We see in the story what can happen when history gets destroyed or manipulated or forgotten. Now, of course, history is important for all sorts of reasons, but I think it's absolutely crucial for us in at least two basic ways. So, first of all, only by looking back into our past can we truly come to know ourselves, right? History is a portal into self-knowledge. I mean, we're not like the goddess Athena, right? Who was born from Zeus's head, and so without a mother and without an umbilical cord. No, whether we're aware of it or not, we carry within us a kind of collective psychic life shaped by forces of our past heredity. So to know who we are then means to know something about this past and the people who had lived it. To lose our connection with our history, to sever all connection with our past, is to lose our blood ties and the larger tradition and world from which it came, and to therefore lose out on a fuller picture on who we are. Okay, well, so the second reason why history is crucial is this. It provides us with the resources or the capacity for action and for dissent. I mean, when we hear someone tell us that, that there is no other course of action, or that this is how things have always been done, we can look back to history and tell them, no, you're lying. That's just not true. And that's because history points out that there have always been many courses of action and, just as importantly, many ways of being in the world. So, without recourse to history then, we lose out on the most important of revelations, namely that despite present circumstances, it is possible to make a real change. Okay, so just to finally end here, I thought I'd mention something about Herodotus, the father of history, because I think it's kind of relevant here. Okay, so here's the thing. I really like Herodotus's description of history. Now, obviously, the point of history is to provide us with some degree of truth about the past, right? Okay, but for Herodotus, the purpose of history was to specifically celebrate, aletheia. Now, aletheia is a Greek word which is often taken to mean just truth. But actually, its literal translation is not truth exactly, but something like not forgetting. You see, it's so interesting. You see, the word aletheia is based on the mythical river Lethe, which resided in the Greek underworld. And what Lethe was known as was the river of forgetfulness or unmindfulness. And it flowed around the cave of Hypnos, a word which meant night or sleep. Now, not surprisingly, all those who drank from Lethe experienced, well, complete forgetfulness. So much so, in fact, that it was said that if you drank just one drop of its waters, it'll be as if you're a new person with absolutely no memories of your past. Okay, well, so that's the Lethe in aletheia. Okay, so what's the A before it? Well, of course, it's the alpha privative prefix. And of course, it serves to negate the idea that it precedes. Hence, we get unforgetfulness or not forgetting. Okay, so now back to my main point. It's in this way that Herodotus uses aletheia when he talks about history. He believes that the purpose of history is to look into those things that are not simply just true, but that should not be forgotten. I think this is really suggestive. It tells us that history, at least in this sense, is about trying to preserve not every aspect of the past, not the totality of truth, but those aspects that are somehow important for us to know and to keep alive today. In other words, those aspects that we'd be worse off if we didn't preserve in our memory and make use of today. Those aspects of our past that preserve our identity so we don't become fodder for manipulation. So that we don't, like Winston, stop struggling and come to love Big Brother. Bye for now.